Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Today's episode, lifelong learning to do what you love to do. This episode is very interesting because I get to interview a wonderful individual who has a vast amount of experience. He is an individual that has had a long career with AT&T and has formed employee resource groups and has helped within the community. He's been a wonderful advocate and community organizer in various community events, which include organizing of an event for Linda Ronstadt up in the San Francisco Bay Area. I am so happy to introduce El Señor Ed Vargas, who we will be learning from so many things about in this wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Welcome, Ed Vargas, to the show. Welcome back to another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Thank you to the audience, to the loyal listeners, to the loyal viewers. This is a podcast with video and also extracted with audio for the Anchor.fm episode. Today, I have the fantastic opportunity of interviewing a wonderful individual from the San Francisco Bay Area. His name is El Señor Ed Vargas. He is the owner and the founder of Vargas Associates. He obtained a bachelor's in commerce and marketing, business administration, and he also has his Juris Doctor from Santa Clara University. He's known as a go-to team player based on listening, building awareness, credibility, and trust among diverse teams, developing strategies, programs, and delivering results. He became VP of Sales and Marketing at the age of 30 for a Fortune 200 firm. Ed prioritized and conscientiously decided to take other roles in order to remain in the San Francisco Bay Area. He has been very active in the Latino community as a true advocate of advancement. Aside from all of that, Ed is also a lifelong musician. He plays the guitar and lives with his family in the San Francisco Bay Area. Ed, Señor Ed Vargas, thank you for joining me today in the Success Innovation episode. How are you this evening?
Great, Lazaro. I'm really, really happy to be part of your group here and really commend you on the work that you do in terms of getting positive stories out, letting people, whether they're Latino or not, know about the successes and the innovation that we brought together to the world.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Congratulations to you too.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for those kind words. I do it. I'm not a professional, but I do it out of passion. I really enjoy getting those stories out so that the public knows and understands what it takes to actually be successful. That success is not something that happens overnight. It is something that is developed within preparation and persistence and dedication. And I want those stories to shine through for what they are. And in a sense, motivate other individuals who listen and participate watching the episodes that Success Innovation brings for them. So with that being said, thank you for being one of those amazing guests in our show today with Success Innovation. Can you tell me a little bit about, we were talking about your early beginnings and upbringing, and you were telling me something really interesting about your dad and how he was part of World War II. Can you kind of delve into some of that before we get into where you come into the story?
I'm happy to.
Okay.
Some of the things in terms of how I started off, in a humble, background, but really my first two mentors were my parents. My dad was a World War II veteran. Here's a photo of him when he was there in North Africa. He was a radio operator. One of the people that he met in being in the military was my mom's brother. And so the two of them met, really had a very strong Latina mother. Didn't throw chanclas, but you knew when she put the rules down that those needed to be followed. My dad's background in the military led him to start a Hispanic veterans organization called the Regular Veterans Association there in San Jose. And unfortunately, I didn't, as a little kid, I got involved with all those activities. They would do organization things to raise funds. help the community. And then as I got older, I realized one of the reasons that they set up this post for Latinos was that in the larger organization, the national organization, some of the people in the national leadership were from the South. And back in those days, it was, whites drink in these fountains and blacks don't. And that mentality sometimes came across in a situation where we have, a world war and people have to rely upon the person next to them. That experience my dad had lived with him through his whole life. That's something that I learned from in terms of being able to tap into yourself and want to be somebody you can count on. Right now with this pandemic, we're coming together. We're all in this together. That's the message that I had growing up and really had strong parents. So I was really fortunate. I was growing up in a household where I could see from the heart is where their leadership was coming from. And he became the president of this veterans post. And that's something that has stayed with me till today. Wow. Something that you try to be some people call them now servant leaders. I get sometimes smile when I hear that terminology, but that to me is that when you're leading from passion and helping other people, that to me is really the core message.
So when you were a little young little chavalito, let me ask you, you were born in San Francisco from what we said, but was your dad at first?
Before Silicon Valley, San Jose is where I was born, and that's where my dad and my mom met. So San Francisco Bay Area, as long as I'm within 50 miles of San Francisco, I'm good.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So was your dad a first generation? Did he come across, and was he a migrant, or was he a child born from immigrants, or was he always, his family roots have always been in California?
My dad was born in California, and my mom was born in California. But again, my grandparents on my dad's side, my grandmother was a full-blooded Yaqui Indian from Arizona. My grandfather on my dad's side was a vaquero. My grandfather on my mom's side, her maiden name was Martinez. I've got some French background from my mom, and she was very, very light-skinned compared to other Latinos in that time frame. So here's a quick picture. This is my mom here standing next to me, my dad, my sister Mary, my brother Steve, and my sister Phyllis. This was about a 1974 picture, just when I graduated from college. But their connection, both of them, my dad was the president of this Regular Veterans Association post, and my mom became the president of the Ladies Auxiliary for that. So those were really strong influences that I had. My brother Steve was, when he was born with a cleft palate and a cleft lip. And if you're not familiar with that, is that in the first 60, 90 days as the baby is being formed, sometimes the mouth doesn't completely form and the inside of the mouth doesn't completely form. So he had a tough time.
The top portion of it, yes. If you look at it, it would be split like this. It would have essentially an opening, and right. You'd have skin on it, but you can feel that there's an opening around it, and they have to essentially fuse it together or do some sort of operation to get it back in.
And it was tough on the family. It was tough on him because from being a little baby, he went through 3 operations in his first 2 years, just so that they could get things aligned. And then even when he was growing up and about to be a teenager, they had to basically a medical procedure to break his jaw, reset it, so that as he was growing up, they still had to be aware and align that. And then the other challenge was that it was something that bonded us always together, is that being an older brother, I was very protective of him, especially when we went to the same elementary school. And because he had a speech impediment with those things that he was working through, he would go to speech class at San Jose State, getting those classes on a regular basis. But at school, when he was a little chavalito, some kids his age would would make fun of him or would bully him. And being, older, I would come in and separate that situation. So they knew that if I was around, that wasn't going to happen. So that was something that also, formed my background, is that, for familia, you want to make sure you're taking care of them and they're taking care of you as well.
Okay, fantastic. Let me go back to your dad and your mom. Your dad, he was in the military, he was in the Air Force. He comes back from World War II and he decides to, create this organization for the Latino veterans over in the San Francisco Bay Area. And then you essentially grew up watching this organization, him being a leader in his community. I'm assuming that had profound effects on you, but you obviously pursued an education career. Was having your dad as a role model, being a leader in that, affect you now in retrospect to become a leader and to actually pursue a higher education?
That's a good question. I really, really appreciate you asking that question. So for me, growing up from a family, my dad had a high school education, my mom did not.
Okay.
They, again, would do everything. They would help us in any way they could. But I had no, expectation in my mind. As a young boy, I was getting into playing sports, mostly outdoors at the time. It wasn't until one teacher, when I was in the 8th grade, said to several of us, saying, there's this Catholic all-boys Jesuit high school, and based on your academics, based on your athletic, background, he really recommended that we apply. So that was kind of the pivot for me to say to my parents, I said, I've never heard of this school, but, would that be something that you would like me to pursue? And so my dad took me down, I took the test, I got in. A couple of my students, friends from junior high school also joined Bellarmine at the time. And that's where that Jesuit background, where, again, helping others became a real strong message. I got into sports. I played football. I really enjoyed that camaraderie, that brotherhood that was there. And that's something that still, I still have these lifelong friends from that experience. I was fortunate enough to be, play, varsity football. When I was a freshman, looking up at the seniors that were playing football that year, we just coincidentally happened to have 4 high school All-Americans. They were the #1 team in California, and they were the #1 defense for high school football in the nation. These guys were big. I'm looking up at these guys, and that was the bar that was set, is that, you strive to do your very best. And to me, and we would say a prayer before the game, and then when we would come back, even from an away game, we'd go back to the Virgin Mary statue there on campus and say another prayer. And to me, I was able to make the difference in my head between play as hard as you can, give it all, leave it all on the field, but after the game's over, it's around sportsmanship. You shake the other player's hand, and you come back and try it again the following week. This whole thing about, we're #1, I think people really have, missed the boat or the message about what sports are about sometimes. And that's something that I go back and really tried to encourage. Even when my son was looking at entering sports in high school, I really wanted him to join a sport so that he'd have that experience of having teammates that you can count on and play and do your best. But again, do something that you like to do. Don't play football because I played football. It was something that I really wanted to stress, and that's how I view sports today. Is that there's the Dodgers versus the Giants, but that's a game. That's a rivalry on the field. They're professionals, and that's where it ends. To have people looking at colors and saying, beating somebody up because they're the other team's fan, that doesn't make sense to me at all.
Right. Correctly. And now that you mentioned, those rivalries, I'm gonna go back to when you were a small kid because from what I understand, you were born and you grew up and you were going to school in the era where the pre-civil rights movement. So you were still part of that era where equal but separate but equal type of thing. I don't know if you can kind of talk to us a little bit about that without getting too political in it, but I think it's very, very important that the audience hears your perspective.
So again, as a young boy, I look at things that made an impression upon me, and to the point of this picture right here. This is a gentleman who struck me as not only this amazing music talent. This is Louis Armstrong. My parents took my family to a Louis Armstrong concert in San Jose, where we grew up. And at that time, one of my ideas was that I love mariachi music, and the opportunity to play, to learn how to play trumpet. I asked my dad, I said, would it be possible, could you take me backstage after the concert? And I'd like to ask him, what can I do to play better? And my dad smiled at me. It's like, you want to meet Louis Armstrong and hear that kind of message? And I did. So he took me backstage after the concert, and fortunately, there was the stage manager, the band manager there. And my dad asked him, could my son meet Louis Armstrong? And he had this completely expression like, are you kidding? But he did. I asked Louis Armstrong. I could see the door open to the dressing room there. And that smile that he's known for, he just, to me in the moment, looked at me as this little kid as to how can I help him? Didn't matter what color I was. The fact that I admired him, and he gave me some tips, and you can see he signed my program. Right. So to me, growing up, it was less about color. It was all about, how can I do better? How can I encourage people to do their best? To me, he's an ambassador, using music as a way to bring cultures, people of all ages together. I was just a little kid at the time, but here's this gentleman who certainly, growing up in the South, the Deep South, he experienced the worst kind of hatred you could possibly experience. Back in those days, they had places where if you were Black, you couldn't play, right? So to me, again, looking at music as to how that brings people together, that's been a reference point for me. Later on, if you'd like, I could tell you about some of the things when I got into becoming a national speaker. I was actually invited to Harvard to talk, to be part of this diversity roundtable. And the focus there was looking at companies that did not have diversity and were forced, consent decree, for example, that they needed to apply diverse and hire diverse, more of a diverse base to their company. There was affirmative action that said you must, and those were looking at numbers. But again, okay, what's the minimum number of people they have to hire to say that they meet that standard? But are they really developing them? Are they really promoting them? Those were the kind of things we were talking about in that roundtable. Right. So to answer your question, I've been aware of this. One of the things that I grew up in my heart as a bucket list thing or a dream that I'd like to have, I wanted to travel and do business on an international basis. So I wanted to see outside of California what life was like in other states, what life was like if I was a resident or someone that was a native coming from a different country. And I would really recommend, Lazaro, this is one of the things that I tell people when I speak at presentations. If you're born in the U.S., it would really be important for you to travel to other countries and see how people, United States citizens, are treated in those other countries. And my experience says that if you see how you're perceived and what they hear and they read about in the news in the U.S., that if you are getting that message, you interact with people on their home turf where they have their culture and their heritage, you come back to the U.S. with a different balance in your mind. It's something where if you've only lived in your own little town and not met other people. California is the most diverse state we have in the country. But I also had the experience when I used to travel a lot on business, that if I went through the Midwest, I would get onto a plane, and there would be people, they're from the Midwest, they do things the way they do there, and they don't see that kind of diversity. So many times I would, along the flight, and we'd break into a conversation, I would be the person that would be new to them and that would not necessarily match the stereotype they might have of someone with a Latino background. Right. So one of the things that I learned growing up by going to that prep school is that I was trying to do my best. I was going to represent whom I was in my family, but I'm also somebody that understands not everybody's from my background, and I'm not from their background. So where is that equal point? Where can we find a place where we can talk and dialogue and even come up with new ideas together, and people buy into that? That's one of the skills that I found in corporations, where you work for this one division group versus another group, and I would often be the translator, let's say, between tech people and marketing people, because they have different agendas, they have different things that they're being measured on. And I would kind of find that place where, okay, these are the requirements from a technical process that when you put input or content, you have to find that place, that equilibrium place where those things are going to work. And then likewise, how can we change things? So even changing, if you have new software, companies like AT&T, they had this ancient design of their hardware. So I got involved with a team that we led a migration of the old hardware to new hardware that would be more compatible with the latest software, so that those things could change on a much quicker turnaround scale as well. So back to your point is that, again, you try to get people to see another perspective, and you respect each other. To me, it's based on credibility, how you approach somebody, generating the opportunity to create trust, that bond between people, and you give respect, and you will get respect. That to me has been a lot of the success that I've had, whether it's a corporate level, a nonprofit, those kinds of organizations. It's bringing people together so they can go to a new place and do it better.
Fantastic. So thank you for sharing that with us, Ed. I want to ask you more about your professional path, because you have a marketing and business administration degree. But then how did that lead you to work with AT&T? And before I get to that, you mentioned that you became a BP at the age of 30 for a Fortune 200 firm. Can you kind of lead us as to how that path came about?
Sure, happy to do that. When I got a chance to go to work, it was basically in the context of when I entered law school. My first year of law school, as everybody finds out, it's a challenge. On top of that, unfortunately, my mom, we learned that she had cancer in her lungs. And then shortly after that, my dad had a heart attack. Mm-hmm. So after my first year of law school, I took some time off to kind of get those things taken care of, and decided that for my benefit, for what I'd like to do, what some of my priorities were, that I would continue my law degree going through the night school program, to get my degree. But I needed and wanted to bring some income in and go to work. So I got into the packaging business. I got recruited to become a salesperson in a packaging company called Owens, Illinois. They were a very large company. And I learned very quickly, training in the Midwest, my client base were predominantly soft drink companies, breweries on the West Coast, and gave me a chance to travel up and down California, Oregon, and Washington. Did that and was, again, doing well. They wanted to recruit me to come to work in headquarters in Toledo, Ohio. And at that point, my wife was a nurse. She had her nursing degree from San Jose State and decided that I wanted to stay on the West Coast. So I went to a competitor, and just lo and behold, when I got there, I was the marketing manager for product development, again, another packaging company. And then a recession hit. And some of the people that were, some of the officers there, they decided that, you know, they were going to do something different. I was in a situation where I could actually become a senior executive in that company, but I would need to rely on my background, my marketing, and really pull it together. In spite of a recession, how do you bring new business in? And so I took that on as a real personal challenge, and had the opportunity to, I learned by the background that I had at the first packaging company, how important R&D was as a component. And because we were on the West Coast and some of the packaging companies that were headquartered in the Midwest, it was more of a difficult challenge to have R&D at a facility back in Ohio, let's say, for people on the West Coast. And for us, it was something very convenient. We could, you know, have them come into our facility and turn things around for them much faster and save freight for shipping from the Midwest to the West Coast. So from a cost incentive and looking to help them with their own product development on the West Coast, literally, I was fortunate working with companies. Oh, and I forgot to mention, the largest single customer that we had at the time was closing their plant in Berkeley. And so 30% of our business was going to go away within the next year. So that was the incentive for me, is that how do you replace your largest single customer? And that's what I did. I really honed my skills on how to market what we could offer. We worked with the organization to really, you know, focus on R&D kinds of things that we could bring to the table, and developed relationships where we got many customers and large contracts that literally required us to double the capacity that we had. And we opened up another operation in Southern California in a recession. So that to me was the background that I had. One thing that I mentioned to you before is that, you know, working for a corporation, you know, you do the best you possibly can, but whether it's because it's privately held and sold, whether there's a hostile corporate takeover, whether some component of a company is sold off, you really can't assume that you've got a lifelong job for any given organization in that sense. So that's just something you need to be able to prepare and deal with from that standpoint. So when I left that packaging company, because after building it up, the owner of that company decided he was going to sell it off. He got a great offer from McCormick Schilling, who they wanted to use the facility that we created in Southern California for all their packaging needs. They relocated the equipment that we had in the Northern California area down to expand what we built in Southern California. So with that, I was actually recruited with the success that I had there to become a corporate planner for another packaging company that was headquartered in San Francisco called Crown Zellerbach, and got a chance to, again, come in as a product marketing manager, a corporate group planner, then a product marketing manager. But then there was a hostile corporate takeover there. And in the group that I was in, we even proposed a spinoff. We had at that time they were called poison pills. They would make it that much more expensive for companies to buy the controlling interest the way that they wanted to go. But this particular gentleman, Sir James Goldsmith, that's what he did. There were people back in those days that they would buy an entity and sell off the components to make more money selling off a component to a competitor, let's say. So the company, the group that I was in, became part of something called the James River Corporation, and they were headquartered in Virginia. And when the time came to, for me, they said, we really like what you do. We'd like you to relocate to Virginia again. That to me was a signal that no, my family, my wife's family is based here in the Bay Area. So I chose not to follow that path. And that's where one of the things that I started doing was focusing on then starting my own consulting business, my own marketing business. how I got into AT&T was actually, the original framework was a company called Pacific Bell, headquartered covering the California, Nevada market. And the Pacific Bell entity, they were looking at being taken over by SBC, SBC was the corporate entity that bought Pacific Bell, Southwestern Bell. And with
is that when they turned it into Singular Cellular or something like that? Is that when they turned it into Singular?
So real short history. Back in the day, AT&T as a business was too big, and it was by design. The government made them break up into multiple Bell companies on a regional basis, and AT&T was going to be the long distance component. Well, what happened over a period of time is that SBC in Texas bought the West Coast, they bought Ameritech in the Midwest, they bought Bell South and Singular, and put basically everything back together and added that mobility capability. So I was consulting, I was working with a Hispanic, Spanish language ad agency as my client, and they said they have the account with Pacific Bell, and they wanted to see if they could get that Spanish language business from SBC. So I reached out, I got a hold of who those SBC decision makers were, had them come to San Francisco. I made the presentation, and even before SBC bought Pacific Bell, they were able to say that they've got the SBC, that 13-state business. So to that moment, I was even offered, the same day I was offered the director of business development for that Spanish ad agency in San Francisco, both headquarters. Good group of people. They're still in doing business in the city. But I took the opportunity thinking longer term, there would be more resources, more growth with this SBC Pacific Bell entity. So I became the manager for the Hispanic segment of the consumer business for Pacific Bell SBC. So that's how I got into the flow of what was going on there. And as you mentioned a moment ago, with this acquisition, that acquisition, it really became more of, I got in on a product marketing component basis, but then I got into operations, I got into sales, I got into product development, I got into alternate channels, to the point where the last 10 plus years, I've been focused on, when they bought Singular, I was kind of the liaison between Singular as a separate company versus what at that time SBC was doing. But then as they increased the visibility and the e-commerce platform, doing things online, that's a lot of what I've been focusing on the last several years. And then, they buy little companies like DirecTV and Time Warner, and all of a sudden they've got 130 billion in debt. But again, using the e-commerce platform, what are the metrics, the analytics? How do you work with the product development people so that you understand what people are hearing and saying online? And then if you buy online, can you get that in the store delivered? All those kinds of things. That's kind of the evolution that I helped develop there when I was with AT&T on the e-commerce platform.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. No, that's awesome. That's amazing. Really, really interesting path in the business sector and this technology giant per se of AT&T in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I want to make a little pause and a little comment here to the individuals, young individuals that are thinking of going into whatever career path you are following. If you're in high school, and also if you're in college, or if you're also a young professional starting out in your career. Mr. Vargas here has made key comments about making a conscientious decision of whether he could move with a career path that he was following, or decided to stay in a location because of personal reasons. Now, you as a young individual have to make those decisions as well. And you have to think about what is best for you at that particular moment in time. But you also have to make sure that you can live with those decisions because those consequences ultimately will be yours. So I want to commend Mr. Vargas for sharing that information with us and the decisions he's made throughout his career path. And then now you mentioned that you were part of the Latino managerial positions, and how did you start getting into the diversity and affinity groups? Because that's something that you've advocated for very hard for ERGs, employee resource groups, also known as affinity groups. So can you kind of talk to us about that for a little bit?
Sure, happy to do that. One of the things that when I started Pacific Bell was I could do so many things as an individual consultant, but again, to have a greater impact, I saw what doors that by being in that kind of a situation with a large corporation and more resources, how that would even provide even more of an impact. So one thing, for example, I was in the LPA, Latino Professional Association at Pacific Bell when I joined. And with the people that were there, we saw that, well, with SBC's now our new parent company, our focus was on, at a local level, how do we get high school kids, Latino high school students, how do we get them and help them into college? So we started something that first year after being part of SBC. It was something that we called High Technology or High Tech Day. And that was our opportunity to start providing STEM workshops at an AT&T facility. We partnered with bringing in the local high school students and around that area, and we would give them our Arduino, kits. We talked to them about, these are the jobs here at AT&T. Think of yourself in that regard, how you could, use these tools, how, we also offered scholarship applications. And I'm proud to say that over that 21 period time that I was with Pacific Bell, SBC, AT&T, the ASEMOS organization that started in 1888 from Southwestern Bell and Pacific Bell, that they've given over $3 million in scholarships to Latino or any student that applied to their scholarship fund. And that's been across the country. High Tech Day is the ASEMOS, the AT&T Hispanic Employee Research Group. That's their flagship event now. So I'm really proud that something we started in San Ramon, California with a few high schools is now, they do this in October. They usually bring more than 32 different AT&T facilities together on that same day. They partner with Junior Achievement nationally so that they have an ongoing rotating list of the local high school students that come into an AT&T facility. We give them STEM workshops and things beyond Arduino kits. We've got things like the cars that have chips in them. So they basically have, Wi-Fi in the car. So, and then things like, the drones that are available now. They even have them for companies that have like the cell towers. AT&T themselves use the drones to do a quick inspection to decide, what might be wrong. So many things with technology are tools, and I really have been encouraging students over the years to think about tech as a way that you could see a career and move from wherever you're at and move up from however you want to do. You could be your own, if you're driving use the image of you've got your own boat, you're the one that's right at the helm there, steering the boat wherever. And if you see something coming up that doesn't turn out the way you planned, you move to this side, you move to that side. Something that I want to share with you, if you would like, even to make it available. I'm most recently, again, I've partnered with a group called Silicon Valley Latino. Alex Ontiveros is the CEO of that here in the Bay Area. And he reached out to the University of Santa Clara at the dean of the admission program there. And last November, they had the first Saturday in November, they had something called Creo en Ti, I Believe in You.
Right.
And I was a moderator for a panel in the morning and a panel in the afternoon. And I think I shared that with you, a document You're more than welcome to put that document up for people to download. It was focusing on two things. We had professionals from the tech business talking about their career, and I went through a list of questions, and we took Q&A from the students, families, and teachers. We had over 400 high school students from Salinas, from Merced, from Sacramento, San Francisco come to the Santa Clara campus, and they opened that morning with how to understand the economics of going to a community college, to go through a California State College, to go through a private school, and then they introduced, they moved them into different workout sessions or workshops, and I was the one that led the ones around tech as a career. So I'm happy to share that with you. We can talk a little bit later at the end of the program, because I also am an ambassador with this We Are All Human Foundation on the East Coast. And I included some statistics to let Latino families know about the success of Latino entrepreneurs. That they're really empowering people that start their own business, hire other Latinos, and I certainly want to make sure that people see the full playing field, that they don't feel that they don't have opportunities. That for me, knowing from my own family and many of the people that I know that are Latino, they're hard workers. They're some of the hardest working people, whether it's farm workers or an entrepreneur. They will get the job done. And I want, people to see that there are doors that will open if you have that skill set, if you have something in an area that needs a background that understands tech, like yourself, for example, and how we could do that. So I'm happy to also share something that I used in that class. It's called the College and Career Strategic Planning Tool. So going back to my corporate planning background, a lot of kids are saying, well, what do I do? They're just so confused. They don't know how to grab it, where to start. So I really illustrate, you can picture a triangle. And at the top, I have them give me where you see yourself in 5 years. What's your vision? Mm-hmm. State what you'd like to love to do as a career or a direction. So that's this top. The next level are your goals. State what you want to achieve in 5 years. So those are specific things that you would set for yourself if you have that vision. Then you get into the meat, that's the objectives, where you would state, if it's a 5-year plan, what are the specific milestones you need to reach 6 months, a year, 18 months, so that you achieve those goals that you just laid out. Mm-hmm. And then below that, you need a strategy to achieve each of those objectives. So you state how you would list the different ways. So for example, now more than ever, the cost of education is huge. So from a financial perspective, how do you finance to go to a particular school? Is it a value, for example, maybe a strategy is to get an internship at one of the companies you think you might like to work at. And so not only would you get an opportunity to, earn some income as an intern, but you get that visibility and your name gets put on a list that says, this kid's really sharp. When we are in a point to hire somebody and he's got a degree, we're going to hire him or her. So to me, that is a really a good way to say, from these individual strategies, then once you have those in place, that sets your activities that, again, you would prioritize. Spend time each week doing the things that support each of your strategies so that you move those strategies along to reach those objectives and timelines. I walk those kids through that and share that with their parents so that aside from that workshop day, they can go home and have a dialogue or a conversation about how that family can help them move forward. Scholarships, for example. You can get more than one scholarship to cover a particular expense. Connect with ERGs. They have scholarships. All different kinds of things. I was fortunate where I actually turned down a full scholarship to play football at St. Mary's College in Moraga from my Bellarmine football days. So that meant I was fortunate also to have an academic scholarship. That covered most of my tuition, but my living expenses and things I had to do on my own. So that's where I got into playing music as a part-time way to earn more money to cover those total expenses for college. So that's something I'm really, encouraging. I love to give kids that opportunity so that they feel confident in approaching a career and think through those things as well.
Okay, you mentioned a lot of key important things right there. You mentioned, STEM. STEM's really popular right now. Science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Along with that, you mentioned that for that high-tech day, you guys use Arduino kits, or that's how it started. Arduino kits are little smart, programmable memory cards, computer little things that are very versatile. And I talked about them in another episode, and I also had a live workshop a couple months back where I had a group of community college students as well as high school students partake in that type of program. So some of the audience that watches this knows what an Arduino kit is. If you don't know what it is, I'll go ahead and put a little link in the notes below so that you can click on it and go find out a little more about that. Also, ERGs. ERGs are a very important, from my perspective, and I believe from Mr. Vargas' perspective also, are very important diversity and inclusion type of groups within corporations. And this type of employee resource group is a group that believes in something that can make the life of individuals within the workforce more valuable, but not necessarily just doing work for work's sakes for the industry. They believe in pulling together their common traits, their common abilities, the value that they can add to the local community to go ahead and go outside and do outreach type events and support and bring up other individuals. Because if you know, some people say it's very lonely at the top, but if you look down, there's people below you that you can actually reach down and help with the skills that you've learned, with the obstacles that you've encountered. With those lessons, you can teach those lessons to other individuals to empower them to come up and be at your playing field level, essentially. So thank you, Mr. Vargas, for sharing all that wonderful information with me and allowing me to be able to showcase some of that. You also have, from our conversation earlier, how did you get involved in doing organization for Linda Ronstadt and also for Los Lobos back in the 90s, from what I understand? This is when it was taking place, or maybe the early 2000s. Can you kind of share with us how that came about?
Sure. Again, when you have the opportunity to do something that you're passionate about, and for me, it was music. I don't know if you can see the background here on my side, is that I was really in my consulting business focusing on Latino nonprofits. So it wasn't just, making widgets and gizmos in a corporation. It was an opportunity for me to try to look at the different types of organizations. So I became, with the background I had in marketing and public relations, the strengths that I had there, I was elected to be the president of something called Latinos in Communications. And those were the people that were the on-air talent for English-speaking and Spanish-speaking television stations, radio stations. So because I had that connection, I approached the nonprofit that managed the Cinco de Mayo events and Carnaval. They do. And I actually helped them look through and did some consulting about strategic planning. One of the things that, to me, back in those days, so many times Latino organizations, Latino communities, they would be targeted with beer ads and tobacco companies. Mm-hmm. And this organization, to me, kind of came up because they were making a statement. They were saying, we're not going to take any more sponsorship money from tobacco companies. So to me, that was a real positive commitment and statement to make. And I wanted to help them I was able to also reach out and work with their people that talk to their sponsors. So I was able to reach out to Toyota. Toyota understood the value of Latino consumers, and they wanted to be the main sponsor for this event. So I brought in the top big sponsor to minimize that loss of the tobacco company sponsorship dollars. I also had a chance to coordinate all the people that wanted to do the interviews and cover this information. And so I got a chance to meet all the artists, Los Lobos, work with them. This picture that you see, it's the largest attendance that they've had for a Cinco de Mayo festival. There was over 200,000 people for this performance here by Los Lobos. I took this photo from Mayor Willie Brown's office window that overlooks the Civic Center. And so people were just really, at that time, things like La Bamba, you know, that was really popular. So people really connected with Los Lobos. Linda Ronstadt, she had released this Canciones de mi Padre album, all talking about her background and performing. I found that in real life, she's very shy sometimes. And she agreed to be the Grand Marshal for the parade, and she was going to dress up. But she said, I am not going to sing. I'm not going to sing. So what this organization had done is that just coincidentally, the float that she was going to be on as the Grand Marshal just happened to have a mariachi band. They just happened to know the songs that she did on her CD. So as the procession, the parade commenced, and she saw the people just loving her, that Linda, you know, and then they started playing mariachi music. She grabbed the microphone and sang the whole parade down.
Wow.
So it was one of those moments, is that as shy as she was saying, you know, and the contract, you know, she's not obligated to sing. They just made it easy for her, that the moment was there. She just loves performing for people, and that audience just really loved her. So that was an opportunity I even had before that event. She was down recording with Aaron Neville in LA. And so I did an interview with her, and that became one of the articles that helped let people know that this is Linda Ronstadt. She's going to be at the parade, and you get a chance to see her in person.
That's pretty amazing. That's an amazing experience. I'm pretty sure you've had many more of those. Was this something that you were able to do through Vargas and Associates, or was this something that, yes, okay, so you were performing under that at that point. Okay.
And then again, one of the things that, from my view, is that with the volume of work that I would focus on, I wanted to expand just other than Vargas and Associates. So a core component for me was to partner with other entrepreneurs, other consulting groups. So I had a chance to actually begin diversity inclusion training at a company called Kaiser Permanente, healthcare company headquartered in Oakland. And that was through being a consultant with Herman Gear, had his own consulting firm at the time, co-development group. And so I was a consultant with co-development group, partnering with my group, that gave me that opportunity to develop, what training for diversity would look like at a very, very large corporation. So again, I partnered with another woman who was the former publisher for El Mensajero. It was a newspaper there in San Francisco, Spanish language paper. She and another gentleman, Gary Pike, created Communique, a marketing, PR firm. And so I joined in with them, and that's how I transitioned. Instead of just doing this on my own, Communique took that contract over to do the Cinco de Mayos for 92, 93 kind of thing, as I kind of moved in different directions. But again, it's partnering with people, it's looking at what the client needs are, and moving forward in that direction.
You were also part of a board or some sort of advisory board over in Harvard with discussions for diversity groups. Can you kind of touch about that?
So the diversity role that I had at AT&T, for example,
Yeah.
we had chapters throughout the country, and then over the course of that development, as AT&T acquired more, entities, Ameritech, what have you, more and more chapters had the opportunity to come together. So they created this national board. I was the president of the San Ramon chapter for a number of years, and that's where I started with. Earlier, before I was president, we did High Tech Day. But then when I became president, I also saw that here, growing up in Silicon Valley, technology is readily available. I wanted to help external affairs. So the president of AT&T on the West Coast asked if I would be able to help support what they were doing with the United Farm Workers in the Salinas Valley. And what we came up with was this concept called Adelantec. And what Adelantec was it provided leadership training from the Coro Foundation on a Saturday there in Salinas, where the college students, children of United Farm Worker families, had an opportunity to sign up for this program. That the Coro Foundation was a component. At AT&T University, teaching courses for, if you want to be a web designer, developer, something in IT, you can take these courses that are offered through Udacity. They're out of Stanford. And so a component of the Udacity program allowed those same United Farm Worker family children going to college to earn a nano degree. So they could take like 8 or 9 courses and become certified as a web developer or something in a tech area that they wanted. So those courses were made available for them to take that training on their own time. And my role was to bring in ASEMOS, our ERG members in San Ramon, bring them to the table as someone that would have experience writing business plans. And we worked with the students to explain to them what a business plan was. They were given a challenge by the External Affairs president, and we showed them how to do the research, what the methodology would be. And then at the end of that semester for that program for Adelantec, their local representative hosted them at the state capitol in Sacramento, gave them a tour of that, and then the end of the day ended with them doing their respective presentations to the president of the United Farm Workers, External Affairs, and then the mentors that I led to help them make that presentation. So we did that as a 2-year program at Adelantec. With AT&T, the last 2 years that I was there, I was elected to be the executive vice president on the national board for ASEMOS. So I was the external relations person that worked with the competitions at the U.S. Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, where they were asking companies to say, if you enter this competition, you could be the number 1 ERG, or Hispanic ERG in the country, to get into that competition. So I led those efforts. I created something, again, what we talked about earlier, Lazaro, was changing the negative stereotypes and putting out positive stories. So all those Latinos that were in ASEMOS, they were professionals. They'd been there 5, 10, 15 years or more. And to me, those weren't stories that you're seeing in the media. So one of the conferences that we had in Texas, I had a volunteer videographer, Jason Mendez, and we set up a room next to this leadership conference that we had that day for ASEMOS. And I took people off to the side, explained to them the concept, and basically interviewed them on camera to have them tell their story, much like you're doing with your podcast. Right. And so we edited them down into like a 5-minute, 3 to 5 minute story. And then for that next year, we added some music at the beginning and the end. And I think I've shared with you the links to ASEMOS Diversity Latino Stories that you could do a search on YouTube, because we said, well, it's not just enough to have that internal within AT&T. Let's have that as a video that can be shared with family and friends and other organizations. So I invite people to to go onto YouTube and do a search for Hispanic Latino diversity stories, and they could see the president of our national organization. They could see a senior vice president from AT&T speak about his background and how he evolved. So we tried to get across section, not just of Latinos, not just the people from their background from Mexico, but other people that came from, their background is from other areas, Puerto Rico, other areas, countries in South America, as well as volunteers for Hacemos that weren't even Latino,
Right.
but because they believe in the concept of these employee resource group, we often help each other out. So I was an active member on 5 different organizations. One, the Inspire Asian Group, the Women of AT&T, the largest ERG within AT&T. I was involved with the Millennial Group, or the younger group would be Oxygen, active with them, even helping mentor them as they develop, and also with other groups as well. So again, that camaraderie of working together when someone's got an idea and it's successful, let's share best practices. Let's have even a better impact, be more effective, so we can reach more people by sharing our good ideas. That's something that I've always been passionate about and invited people to be a part of something. One example was a project where AT&T said, everybody's working so hard, your health matters.
Thank you, Ed, for sharing some of that with me. You were mentioning earlier that you have an article that you wrote that was posted and published in the Harvard publishings. Can you share that or share that with me and talk a little bit about it?
Sure. Okay, so just to clarify, I've written, one of the things that I did working with Latino organizations, that I've not only done things on the communications, television, that kind of thing, but I've written articles. And so in the Cinco de Mayo program, for example, that I shared earlier with you, with Linda Ronstadt on the cover, I wrote an article projecting what the Latino market was going to look like in 25 years. Well, that was as of 2016. And those words that I put in are right on point with the market and some of the things I'd like to reference later about the We Are All Human Hispanic Leadership Summit in terms of where Hispanic consumers are at. I was part of a article that had been written. The person that hosted people, they invited people that were known across the country in diversity issues. And I was invited by David Thomas. He was a professor there at Harvard University to attend a roundtable on workforce diversity. And the question, or the title of that article was "A Question of Color, a Debate on Race in the U.S. Workplace." And that discussion that we had, that roundtable discussion, turned into an article in the Harvard Business Review. So I'm happy to share a PDF of that with you if you want to post that later.
Yes. But
again, looking at how at that time people were looking at affirmative action, and companies, including AT&T, back when it was Southwestern Bell, the beginning of Hacemos, it was under a consent decree at Southwestern Bell that they had to hire minority people. And so the background is very similar, is that even within AT&T, they did not have that kind of a balance. So civil rights comes along, and consent decrees are things that they have to respond to. The article that I was part of, written by a professor there at Harvard University, one of the eye-opening things for me, not living on the East Coast, I'm growing up in California, as yourself here, where we're one of the most diverse states in all the United States. However, the definition or the perception of diversity when you're in the East Coast, when I was invited and I walked into this room, and I was so grateful to be invited to attend, and I didn't know who the other participants were going to be, I assumed when you say diversity, it would include Asian, it would include East Indian, other people as well. Mm-hmm. When I walked in there, I was only one of two Latino men in the room. Everybody else was African American.
Mm.
And so the discussion around affirmative action, and the professor that posted this was African American as well. And I pulled him to the side before we got into this discussion. I said, seriously, if this is diversity in the workplace and I'm only one of two Latinos here, maybe we need to redo this, or you need to invite, Asians, you need to invite other ethnicities. Mm-hmm. And to the point where obviously that wasn't going to happen for the moment in the meeting. But then I also wrote a letter at the end of that. And I said, it would really be great if you would include other, people of color in your discussion to really, balance the input on. And again, silence. So this article to me says so many things. It says that from affirmative action, where by consent decree, companies had to hire more people of color, but the whole process of training them, developing them, and them becoming leaders in the organization. Years ago, it would be an example, the Titanic. The law said that they had to have certain types of things for safety purposes when that kind of a problem would come up. They would need to be able to take care of the people on the ship. Mm-hmm. Well, at the time, the law said, the biggest ships possible at those days weren't as big as the Titanic. So literally 25% of the total people that were on that fateful ride, they only had lifeboats for 25% of those people, because that met the minimum number that they had. They were within the law. It wasn't that they, excluded them. They just didn't they had the berths built. They just didn't have those with boats on them. So of all the people that were there, 75% died. And the only people that lived were the ones that were on the 25% of the lifeboats. And so taking that analogy to what we're talking about now is that it's not just a numbers of how many people you have of color. What's important is that does the leadership get it? Do they have the focus on developing those people, right, and putting them into positions where they can make decisions and be good leaders for that company, understanding what the dynamics of that consumer base needs to be. So to me,
I think having that development, that's a key word, that's a key path that you mentioned, brought up. Having that development, because bringing in people of color, bringing those numbers in is not a problem. The problem is developing them and ensuring that they have a path for success. Because, once you have an individual in a position, you can showcase they're not succeeding. So obviously you're going to say they're not the best fit for this position, and you can make a legal point of, we need to bring somebody else that can perform under this position. But if you develop those individuals and then you start having a path for, upward mobility, then you start setting that path for retention and being able for that individual to stay within that organization. And that individual also serves as a role model for other individuals to come up through the ranks as well and develop themselves through that process as well. And that's how you start getting a diverse and inclusive type of workforce, from my point of view. I mean, that's what I believe.
Exactly. This is one of my mentors, Ralph de la Vega, and I'll give you the title of his book, Obstacles Welcome. And this gentleman was one of those people that his family was there in Cuba, and they were going to all leave. And when they got to the airport, he was the only one allowed to leave on his own. And so they were immediately being able to find friends that would raise him. They thought just for a few days or a few weeks. It was years later before his family was actually able to join him with what was going on at the time. But he's left AT&T as the CEO of the mobility group. So certainly his story, I would really recommend people read to understand in the context of DACA students, in the context of what's going on in this country. There are people that are successful and have overcome huge obstacles. Along with that, Thaddeus Arroyo was the person at last year's Silicon Valley Leadership Summit that's done each year by Frank and Molly Carbajal, excellent leaders in our community in the Silicon Valley area.
Yes.
He got Thaddeus to introduce Ralph, and these two are just shining examples. And Thaddeus is from the San Francisco area. So these to me are people that are Latinos that are excellent examples of Latino leadership.
Right. And what we're trying to do in this show of Success Innovation is bring people that have been successful in their career path to showcase the obstacles that they've encountered and how they've been able to surpass them, overcome them, or circumvent them in order for them to follow a path of success. And this is where Mr. Ed Vargas is showcasing and sharing with us and the audience as to who are the individuals that he's looking up to, or who he values as individuals that are contributing to portraying a positive image in the Latino and underrepresented minority groups. So in this case, I see a picture of you and Frank Carvajal. And Frank Carvajal, as Mr. Ed mentioned, he is the one that organizes the Silicon Valley Latino Leadership Conference, and that occurs every year. And I think that picture is with him at one of those events, maybe a couple years back. But yes, amazing information, fantastic. Thank you. Yes.
Well, this particular event, and Frank and I have known each other since he was nice enough to acknowledge the life achievements of Ralph de la Vega. But this was at the Stanford campus where the LBAN Association was releasing or publishing the latest statistics on Latino entrepreneurs. So Mark Madrid was there. He's the CEO of that group there. And one of my heroes, I'd never met him until that LBAN meeting, is Saul Trujillo. It's funny, back in that article that I referenced earlier from the Harvard Business Review, they were saying people of color in senior executive positions, and they listed Saul Trujillo at that time was CEO of a telecommunications company called US West. So he was listed as a CEO then. Saul has just been, again, this amazing executive, how he's grown up and supported, nurtured other Latinos in that senior leadership area. He's got friends of mine, really, really amazing people, David and Sarah Chavez. They've got a company called Ingenuity. And even in San Diego, there was something called Latitude. I don't know if you're familiar with that. They've had it.
I've heard about it, yes.
Yeah, so again, it's focusing resources, helping people that could be impact investors for entrepreneurs, and taking a look at how the Latino economy in and of itself is so strong. How can we help each other? And let's just forget, it's not Mexico versus Nicaragua versus Colombia versus Brazil. We're all Latinos.
Right.
And in our country, you know, you're not just Latino, you intermarry as well. Right. So you have other influences like my family. You know, my wife is Japanese American. My son is our background, and then his wife has Hawaiian, Japanese, and Filipino background, and that's my grandson. So from that standpoint, it's how can we all help each other? How can we leverage our Latino sense of familia, and how do we get that moving forward?
Fantastic. It's all about collaborating, and it's all about moving forward. And I see that you have Mrs. Romo Edelman, and she's one of the key individuals that is pushing this human mobility upwards for the Latino community and minorities and individuals. And I believe that you're also supporting that effort, right?
So much so. I mean, there are some people like Ralph de la Vega that just inspire me on who they are as an individual, in addition to what they do. Claudia is one of those people. Claudia Romo Edelman, she founded the We Are All Human organization, and they were doing regional Hispanic leadership summits last year. I was fortunate to be invited to attend the one that was hosted at Salesforce Tower last year. And so Tony Profit is providing welcoming comments here along with Claudia. So again, the thing that Claudia has focused on, they even have something called the Hispanic Promise, which has the opportunity for companies, organizations that see the value of hiring Latinos, developing Latinos, and putting them in key leadership positions. That's what the Hispanic Promise is. So she had companies like Ancestry and others that signed that document right there in San Francisco. And when they had that same event earlier in Texas and in Chicago, she had those corporations that were part of that presentation also sign. So that's the left hand that I've been able to work with Claudia. I'm now what she refers to as an ambassador for the We Are All Human Foundation. And there's a program called Hispanic Star, which again focuses on the strength of Latinos working together, the entrepreneurs, and particularly now with this pandemic, they're taking a focus to make sure that those essential workers like farm workers, that they're also at the table, that we could help each other, help them, making sure they're not getting left behind.
Okay, fantastic. And that effort by Claudia Romo Edelman is still going on at this point in 2020. I hope it goes on and moves forward as the listeners and the audience is probably watching this at whatever time in the future. That is still something that's still very prevalent and going on. At this point, what is the next step for Ed Vargas? I mean, you've been moving along with a lot of successful ventures in your life, but what is the next step for Mr. Vargas right now?
Well, having the opportunity, I've left AT&T, but all the background that I have had in corporations, ERGs, I'd like to share some of that as a consultant right now. There are companies, Salesforce is an example, that one of the things that they have in place is that not only are they a for-profit business, but when they first started, they also created this separate entity that 1% of their corporate profits would fund Salesforce.org. And they would reach out to educational organizations. They would reach out to people that are helping meet social needs. And so hand in hand, as Salesforce has continued to grow internationally, they bring that software where it's not just their clients using their software, it's the customers or clients of their customers that are using the software. So things that we were using as tools when I was in metrics and analytics at AT&T, things like those software platforms are the things that are being put together to, like Tableau, for example, is a software that can be enabled to understand what the key metrics are, the key the KIPs, so that those are the things that organization can focus on. Mm-hmm. So I commend the way Salesforce does their business. For me personally, if they have opportunities at Salesforce or companies that really understand the value of using tech in an ethical way, I've reached back out, for example, to my alma mater, Santa Clara University, and they have something called the Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship. So I'm an entrepreneur, I'm a mentor rather, helping them. The group that I'm working with right now is in Baltimore, Maryland, and they have a business model where a for-profit company that takes properties that need to be rehabilitated, and then they have a nonprofit entity that works with people that have turned around from alcoholism or they were incarcerated, and train them to do the work to rehabilitate those properties and create affordable housing for those people and others as well. So they've been doing that for a couple of years now in area in Maryland, and we're working with them as mentors from the Miller Center of Social Entrepreneurship to see how they could scale that up and bring that to other communities where housing is a need, and help people that really need that kind of help. So the Miller Center for Social Entrepreneurship, they focus on entrepreneurs that are focused on the helping the environment around the world, as well as entrepreneurs in the U.S., Africa, Asia, Latin America. So that's one of the things that's driving me right now, as to how can I take my background, help people that could use those corporate, business model kinds of skills, marketing, communications, taking advantage. I love social media. The fact that we're on Zoom, if we met with a group of people in a networking thing, shelter in place wouldn't let us meet, but we're allowed to have this great conversation, and you could share with other people this way. So those kinds of things as to how like when I talk to our with other mentors from the Miller Center here in California, we talk to the mentee in Maryland in that market there on Zoom every Friday morning. And particularly with this pandemic, there have been business models or things where the way that they depended on meeting with people on a day-to-day basis in their market area, that's no longer on the table. So we're helping them recalculate or refigure how they could still move forward, given the challenges that are going to happen after this shelter-in-place rule goes away.
Correct. No, fantastic. You bring really good, interesting points, being an advocate for the technology advancement in businesses, also being conscientious of, development of individuals within a corporation, and also being more technologically savvy and readjusting to being flexible into an ever-changing business world via using of technology. And in this particular case, we are using Zoom. So, and for those businesses that are able to adapt, they will definitely come out of this with a win in their belt. You've obviously been very successful. You've achieved quite a bit, but what is your definition of success at this point?
Well, for me, it's back to how I grew up. It's having a balance in your life. Okay. It's having something that you do, you can support your family members. For me, living in the Bay Area, where both my wife and my family is still here, being here is important. The skills that I've developed, and again, business is changing, it's evolving. When I keep hearing, winning, when I keep looking at the way success in business was defined, where it's the shareholder value. Well, that's a measure, but what drives me now are those people that look at it on an infinite level. Mm-hmm. It's not just the quarterly profits. It's not just is your iPhone, the elements on it, is it more than what another mobile company has? To me, it's the kind of taking the broader picture, that people that are investing in the communities as well. So those kind of messages, those companies that see using tech in an ethical way, mm-hmm. that's how I define success. If like a company, Facebook, for example, had a lawsuit, I think it was like a $35 billion lawsuit mm-hmm. brought on by, I think it was Illinois, that brought a lawsuit against them because biometrics, putting your thumbprint or your eye to open up an application, they weren't protecting that information. Mm-hmm. So I understand they just settled something like $500 million. So, and they wouldn't admit any guilt. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's like using social media in a ethical way is really important to me. So helping people understand that, if you are on Facebook, this is what you really should be aware of. Mm-hmm. In terms of biometrics, that's not just happening in that state, that's wherever they operate. Mm-hmm. So to me, it's trying to find those companies. Salesforce might be an example of, they even have an organization that's talking about the ethical and humane use of technology. That's part of their D&I, their diversity inclusion, organization that Tony's in charge of. So those are the kind of things that I aspire to, is to be able to bring people together, continue to be innovative in new applications, new ways, but do it in a positive way that helps other people.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that with me. So, in an infinite way, successful individuals using technology for good, that is a good response. Um, this question I really enjoyed. And this one I enjoy because it allows me to ask you to go back in time. Go back in time to when you were, when you were just in that Catholic Jesuit school. And you can talk to that little Ed, Mr. Little Ed Vargas. What would you go back and share with little Ed? Two or three key pieces of advice if you only had about 2 minutes to share with him. What would you share with him?
Well, I remember being a little guy and visiting one of my aunts, my mom's sister, and she had a picture of her oldest son who was in the Air Force. And the picture was him standing in front of a Colosseum there in Italy, the Roman Colosseum. And every time I'd walk past that, I thought to myself, my whole life has been here in San Jose. I would love at some point to travel. I would love to have the opportunity to be in other countries. So if I'm talking to that little boy, keep that dream, keep it alive. Look at ways, again, talking back to that same process where what's your vision? What are your goals? What objectives do you want to state for yourself? So that's something that if you have that thought process, I also would say dream big. When you go to sleep at night, the last thing you think about is what do you want to do? For me, one of the things I learned when I was playing in a band that I had a part-time job. I played in a band at night and I was going to school carrying a load that I wound up with two degrees or enough to cover both of those majors. But for me, the opportunity to take advantage of, we only use 10% of our brain capacity. Mm-hmm. I would say dream, utilize that subconscious mind, and that when you're relaxed, sometimes when I was trying to learn a song, I would put a pencil and a paper next to the radio when I was falling asleep. And I was able to condition myself that if this song that I needed to learn came on with just being half awake, half asleep, I'd try to write down what I thought the chords were at the time. And that, to me, a lot of that, all that other stuff that you have with multitasking and things during the day, you're just relaxed and it's your subconscious mind. So I would say to that chavalito, take advantage of your unconscious mind. Listen to your heart. Listen to your family. And how can you help?
Okay, thank you. So that's amazing. Thank you so much. With this, thank you. I conclude the interview with Mr. El Señor Ed Vargas from the San Francisco Bay Area. Thank you so much to the audience for listening to another wonderful and fantastic episode of Success Innovation. I definitely appreciate your viewership and listening capacities. Thank you so much. I will see you next time. This has been Lázaro Herrera for Success Innovation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lázaro.
Thank you so much for watching another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Today, we had a wonderful learning experience with El Señor Ed Vargas from Vargas Associates. He shared with us what it is and what it takes to build an ERG or an affinity group, employee resource group. He has shared with us a time lapse of what it takes to form a community event with a huge star such as Linda Ronstadt up in the South Bay in San Francisco area, and he has shared with us what it takes to be successful in life and how you can take obstacles and change them and overcome them to be successful in life. He is a wonderful individual, and you are more than welcome to go ahead and seek him out and connect with him via LinkedIn. Thank you so much for listening to another wonderful episode of Success Innovation. Lázaro Herrera signing out. Thank you. Bye-bye.